Vic had just turned 77 in November and made it through Thanksgiving in a good state of mental health, at least. Until a short while before, he was communicative and responsive, but he declined rapidly. Jen took command when she was there, assisting and even directing her grandmother. Where Lou didn't want her to see Vic in his underwear earlier, by Tuesday she was inserting morphine suppositories into Vic's bottom. Lou couldn't bring herself to do it. But Jen was affected by Vic's struggles. She felt awful that she had to fight him for his own good. At one point, the bed broke. During one episode, also, she exerted herself to the point where she sprained some muscles in her arms, and it took a couple of days before the soreness dissipated. She called us and left a message that though Grandpa hadn't died yet, that we better fly up if we wanted to see him before he did. We arrived in Southbridge and Vic was in terrible shape, raspy breath, one eye seemingly stuck open, and occasional struggles to change position. All of us took turns sitting with Vic, holding his hand, in my case stroking his arm, just to let him know if he was aware that he wasn't alone. The hospice woman who was sitting with Vic woke Louise and Jen at the point where she felt Vic was slipping away. Jan and Jen were in the room holding Vic's hand when he passed. At one point, he had stopped breathing, and they thought he was gone, but after about 15 seconds, he gasped for more breath, but shortly thereafter, he stopped altogether. Lou couldn't bring herself to be with him at the end. Finally, Jen came to her and to let her know that it was okay to come into the room. Lou said that she couldn't stand to see him suffer. Jen said that it was okay that he was gone. Lou was startled for a moment, and then she wanted to see him. The morning of the funeral was greeted by an early season snowstorm, making things very messy, slippery, and cold. Somehow there was a mix-up in the readings. They were not the ones we picked, and little Matthew, 8 years old, had to read quite a long passage while Jen read a brief one. Thursday morning, I was in the motel and was awake at 3 in the morning, so I took the opportunity to write out a eulogy which I was to read. By 5 o'clock it was finished, and I went back to bed for a few hours. And this is the piece that I wrote. If sometime during the day or in the days to come you feel a tear of regret or are overcome by a sudden sense of loss, don't deny it. Emotions and tears are human characteristics that we have been blessed with. We have, in fact, suffered a great loss, and we are affected by that. I'm not sure if Vic would like being the object of all this attention. I do know that he would have enjoyed the company. This would have been an opportunity to work the room. His evident love of people manifested itself in his unique ability to strike up a conversation with anyone, family, friend, or stranger. It didn't really matter. If he was conversing, he was content, except on the telephone where less was more. He's left each of us with some special or unique personal memories. Some of you carry childhood memories of an adult who could relate to you on your own terms and who actually had fun teaching you how to tell time or showing you how to tie your shoe. In fact, one of Vic's most endearing qualities was his childlike nature. Not childish, there's a difference. Life was meant to be lived and enjoyed. While he took family responsibilities very seriously, he lived in and for the moment without burdening himself with all the possible problems that might crop up in the future. This might be one of the most important life lessons I learned from him. Two memories I especially recall involve his face. Our first meeting in 1971, when Janet brought me to meet her parents, Vic was sitting there in his reclining chair, looking up at me and set me immediately at ease with that Vic smile and on-the-spot conversational ability. But even then, I could detect a certain impish quality in that face. Then there was the face that could hardly contain his grin and excitement as he burst into the yard at his daughter Ann's house, his arms raised in triumph as he announced that he had won the lottery. He was generous in the ways that counted most in his attention and affection. He was patient with most things that didn't involve cooking. Heaven forbid you interfere with the preparation of his spaghetti sauce. One of the things he took special delight in was teasing. Never hurtful, but rather designed to elicit smiles from the object of his tease. I was tempted to relate a couple of his more interesting witticism, but was reminded that this was probably not the best venue. But even in those last few days, as sick as he was coming up with some snappy remarks. When a caregiver had to return to his vicinity after having taken her leave once, Vic said, "Haven't you left yet?" As much as he loved life, he wasn't particularly afraid of the end of it. He mentioned to me at one point that he wasn't frightened by what was coming. He was just taking one day at a time. Just a few weeks ago, he spoke to Janet and mentioned that the doctor had told him in 2 or 3 months, then goodbye, Charlie. To me, Vic exemplified the quintessential human spirit, loving, caring, patient, tolerant, and with a view of life that, while accepting the realities, was able to keep things in perspective and maintain a sense of humor. A world populated by personalities like Vic will be as close to heaven as we could get. Vic's spirit will occupy a part of my heart. Vic's spirit will occupy a part of my heart for as long as I live. I will forever honor his life and cherish his memories. The conclusion. On December 15th, we spent about 6 hours at my parents' house. I asked my mother about her childhood. She was the youngest. Both her and my dad said that when the girls, Doris, Tootie, Lillian, Charlotte, were young, they were all very generous. The boys, on the other hand, were very stingy. My mother moved from one sister's house to another when her mother couldn't take care of her. My father mentioned that he was quite a card player in the Navy, and it wasn't unusual for him to have as much as $3,000 or more stashed away in winnings. We had a nice Christmas morning with Jen. Lou bought her a VCR. We got her a heavy red bathrobe, which she put on her list of most wanted gifts. Just after noon, Jen, and I headed to Worcester to see my parents. They were happy to see us, but didn't offer us anything to eat. As usual, I brought a bottle of new red wine called Peachy, and Jen brought some small presents for Dee and her grandparents. Dee gave us a fruit basket and a little wooden snowman that she had painted. My parents were very startled when Bob, Nyron, and Shelley walked in the door. She tried to hide them, but I saw tears in her eyes, and my dad was also delighted. Dee stayed in the kitchen with us, but said hardly a word. Bob announced her engagement to Nyron. My parents seemed to get along quite well with him. We stayed till about 3, explaining that we were expected for dinner at Ann's at 4. Barb and her group decided to leave when we did, but after us. My mother asked me when we were alone at what point I knew they were coming. I told her that I had spoken to Barb. She mentioned she might be dropping in. I didn't want her to know that I had set the meeting up to get them together. I only hope that after breaking this ice, Barb will make the effort to keep close in touch, and that somehow she can patch things up with Dee. We had a nice time, and Frank and Ann cooked up a nice dinner. Turkey for the meat eaters and a tasty stuffing for us vegetarians. Paul got Jan and I a good set of speakers for the computer system, spending more than I had advised. Earlier in the day, Lou had given me a $50 bill and Jan $100 the day before. Jen got very weepy when it was time for her to leave. Jan and I walked her out to the car, reminding her that we would always be there for her and that we were only a call away. She said, and is having a lot to contend with, and the pressures has gotten to her. Finally, it was time to head home to Tampa. For me, it had been a full 3 weeks. Emotions ran the gamut. Grieving over the loss of Vic, taken aback at the closing of ranks around Louise and other of Vic's siblings, joy at the opportunity to see so many of our relatives and friends, and most of all, another reunion of our own nuclear family, and as a reaffirmation that our kids were absolutely the best. I put many hours and several revisions into 2 reports that a ward company had given me to do. I had to interpret the owner Khan's scribble. Each report had to be revised several times. I'd faxed drafts to a ward and they'd fax revisions back. I was charging about $20 a report. Even though that was quite a bargain for them, I didn't think I was working fast enough for them. At the end of January of '96, the kids flew back to Florida. We began with the Busch Gardens, followed by a day cruise into the Gulf, and then to SeaWorld in Orlando. At Busch Gardens, Paul and I did the Kumba roller coaster. The kids treated us to a meal at the Grand Floridian, Disney World, on our way back from SeaWorld. I had a 2-day assignment from Computer Plus Staffing at a CAC United Healthcare plant of Florida. It paid $9 an hour. I worked on a project inputting data into the Excel spreadsheets. We faxed Janet's resume to Air Canada, which was opening up a reservation center. They placed an ad in Tampa Tribune. They invited Jan to an open house the next weekend. In early February, we visited Busch Gardens again. The Guy Lombardo Band was performing. We attended 2 of the 3 performances. On February 11th, Jan had a job interview at Air Canada. They interviewed up to 80 people in 2 groups to fill about 40 positions that were opening up. There was a question and answer period followed by a test of basic and geographic skills. Janet passed and got an immediate interview. She accepted the Air Canada position. Jen called us very excitedly, and rightly so. She received a letter from UC at Berkeley, California, the history department, notifying her that she had been accepted into their PhD program. It said that she would receive free tuition for at least the first year and was awarded a stipend of $10,000 to cover room and board. We attended Busch Gardens to see another of the big bands. This time it was Tommy Dorsey and a band led by Buddy Morrow, who was a member of the original group in the 30s. In early March, Louise was staying with us for a bit. We all set off to St. Pete to the wharf. I had to drive Lou and Jen to the end of the wharf because Lou couldn't walk more than 10 or 15 minutes. For the most part, I sat and listened to live music from a trio of banjo players and folk rock duo. Then we spent time at St. Pete Beach, the same place we went with Paul and Alicia. On Sunday, Jan and Lou went to church, after which we headed to Busch Gardens. Lou bought an annual pass since it cost as much as 2 one-day passes. She also rented an electric vehicle for $25, which was a great decision. After a few fits and starts, she got the hang of it, and it was able to keep with us with no trouble. She seemed to enjoy the park, but it was more evident than ever that she lives one cigarette to the next. It's as though she's always thinking about when and where she'll be able to have her next smoke. April '96, Jen visited us. Upon her arrival at the airport, we took her to Spaghetti Warehouse at Ybor City for lunch, probably our go-to restaurant for a good Italian meal. All in all, we had a nice visit. She was excited about Berkeley, but still a little anxious and not knowing anyone once she gets there. In mid-April, Jan was part of a work-related volunteer group from Air Canada that accompanied a group of sick children from the Manitoba area around the Magic Kingdom at Disney. The kids left the province at 4:30 in the morning and arrived in Orlando about 11:30. The chartered plane pulled directly up to the buses on the tarmac. Jan had responsibility for 2 boys and a girl. They were all age 13 or under. They had a great time and hit most of the rides since they were able to use their handicapped entrances, except for Space Mountain, where they had to wait about 45 minutes. More importantly, Jan seemed to enjoy the day a lot. It turned out that, contrary to what volunteers had told them earlier, all the kids were not terminal cases, thank heavens. They had all experienced some sort of illness and were in the process of recovering. Some were permanently disabled and had to have doctors around them at all times. It was especially difficult when they had to go to the bathroom with catheters and such. The end of April, Jen is in Italy with Louise. She called me in the afternoon of the day she left for reassurance and to ask what things she might have forgotten. I thought that she'd be taking this in stride since this was her second trip overseas, the first being to Russia with her high school class. She called again a few days later. She said that they had been feeding her since her arrival. Louise said that they were being put up in a beautiful place overlooking the whole valley. She's been traveling with her sister Lena for almost 2 weeks. They stopped in London and Paris during the tour. We received a couple of postcards from Louise. Lena headed back home after the tour, but Louise continued on to Italy. May 5th, Jen called and told Jan that Uncle Toby had died while at home, sitting in the parlor in his favorite chair, just 2 weeks before their 50th wedding anniversary. When Vic was ill, Toby uncharacteristically spent a good deal of time with his brother-in-law. He had made the comment that he didn't want to suffer the way Vic did in those last few months, and he didn't. According to Lena, who called not long after Jen, he had some kind of a stomach problem a few days before. He was vomiting a lot and brought to the doctor for an exam. They did some tests and gave him an EKG, but nothing was unusual, and he was allowed to return home. Later, Lena had to go out to do an errand. Toby told her to go ahead. It was only a stomach problem. When she came back, she thought he was sleeping. She went over to the TV and turned the volume down so as not to disturb him. He needed his rest, she said. After about 10 minutes, she looked at him and noticed that he didn't seem to be breathing. She went over and felt his hand. It was cold, and she began to shake him but got no response. She called a neighbor and dialed 911. The medical team tried to resuscitate him at home and at the hospital, but he was gone. At first, they thought that it was a massive heart attack, but after examining blood, they ruled that out. They were to do an autopsy to find out. It was probably more having to do with internal bleeding of some sort, possibly an aneurysm. We called Paul Jr. in Alicia's house about 8:30, and he was upset. Toby's death came as a real shock, considering how healthy he seemed. Paul had just attended the funeral of Alicia's mother's step-grandmother, who died after a short illness. This time, Jan returned to Mass, but I stayed in Florida. On her return, Jan said that it was much worse than when Vic died. People didn't expect it at all, but she said that everyone showed up. I think that it was kind of closeness is a lovely thing, maybe especially at this time. Jan said that there would be an attempt made to get the next generation together for something other than a family crisis. The end of May. This time, I was a volunteer for Air Canada's Dream Team as well. Jan and I both volunteered to help escort the special kids around the Magic Kingdom at Disney World. Some were disabled, some suffering from various diseases, and some were having emotional problems. We traveled by van to Orlando Airport to meet them at the tarmac. They arrived in a big 747 about an hour late. From there, we traveled in a caravan of 11 buses to the Magic Kingdom. I was with a group of 3 other adults with 8 children. I enjoyed the experience a lot more than I expected. I love the kids. I try to keep the best interest of the kids in mind. This was their special day, one that they would probably remember as long as they lived. I shared my time among them as much as possible. I talked with them and teased them when I knew they could enjoy the banter. I must say that my favorite was Ashley, a 10-year-old who was quite bright and chatty. Actually, she sat across the aisle from me on the bus, but was very quiet at that point. By the end of the day, she was having a grand old time. I believe she had an emotional problem. Apparently, she was on Ritalin, a strong mood-altering drug. Another of my charges was a boy named Robert. He had some physical problems. One eye was closed, and though he looked slightly retarded, was very much on the ball. He was very small and withdrawn, but was pretty open with me. I built up a good deal of trust with several of the kids. I tried to encourage them to try different rides. Jana was with a group of older kids and got to go on some of the more adult rides. She had a great time too. It was a long day for Jan and I. We were at Air Canada building by 7 o'clock in the morning and didn't get back home until about 11:30 at night. A letter of mine made it into the Tampa Tribune. It was a sarcastic piece about a lack of courtesy of Tampa drivers as exemplified by their seeming inability to use directional signals. In June of '96, the job seemed to be going well for Janet. On Friday, she had training on electronic ticketing, which eliminates the need for paper tickets to be prepared and mailed to travelers. They just appear at the gate with the proper ID and an assigned number. I called my mother and father to congratulate them on their 50th wedding anniversary, which was on June 1st. I asked if my mother received our card, and she acknowledged it, but she didn't say anything about what I had written on the card. Well, disappointing. Not surprising. They were being taken to dinner at the old mill the next day on Saturday by my sisters. Jen didn't go after all. She said that she'd feel funny going without Paul. She was worried she wouldn't know what to talk about. On Wednesday afternoon, June 5th, we were at St. Petersburg Beach in front of the Don Cesar Hotel. We stayed there the previous night. It was a very striking building, pink and white, 6 or 7 stories, styled in a Mediterranean Moorish architecture. It reminded me a lot of the Vinoy at the pier in St. Pete. There were 4 spires that looked like minarets at the center of the top of the building. There's nothing like it anywhere along this stretch of Florida. It was built in 1928 and had been visited by many of the rich and famous over the years. It went to pot after the original owner died in 1940. It was bought by the military and turned into a VA hospital. By the late 60s, it was in disrepair and almost torn down. Preservationists intervened, and eventually someone bought it and put several $1 million into renovations. At the time that we were there, it was a pretty exclusive place. It was a lovely structure, unique, and with a lot of character. We enjoyed ourselves. We watched the sunset at night, listened to acoustic guitar in the afternoon, took a stroll along the beach, and then listened to some piano playing in the lounge. Got a letter from my sister Dee. It appeared that my attempt to give them a little push together worked. The letter was more upbeat than any for the last several months. She apparently suspected something, though. She mentioned how it was curious that shortly after she wrote me about how bitter she felt about Barb, she received a call from Bob asking her to be in the wedding. And she even helped Barb pick out some dresses and has been up there several times since. I wasn't going to admit anything. I didn't want her to think I was capriciously betraying a confidence. There was nothing capricious about the matter, however. It got them together in time to help my parents celebrate their 50th anniversary. Barb emailed me, filling me in on how the 50th anniversary evening went. Here's some of what she wrote. As for Mom and Dad's 50th wedding anniversary, we started by sending a vase of flowers, including 1 gardenia, lilies, roses, and so on, and put a gold bow on it. By the way, Mom had a gardenias and roses in her original bouquet. Mom, Dad, and Diane arrived at our house, this is Barbara, at 5:30 p.m. Naren wanted to wear a suit, and I told him Dad wouldn't have one on. Well, Dad showed up with a suit, and boy, did I catch it. There we presented Mom and Dad with their certificate you sent me. Diane is having it framed. We also gave Mom a corsage of roses and Dad 1 rosebud. We all got in the truck and left for Old Mill and took the scenic route. Now for the meal. Mom orders seafood gumbo. Dad ordered chicken. Diane ordered swordfish without the sword. And I ordered the swordfish too. Naren ordered prime rib special. We ordered zucchini sticks for everyone. Diane and I ordered wine and did it go to Dee's head. Now comes the meal, and Dad is looking at where's the chicken like where's the beef? Mom's mouth is on fire. She kept saying to me, is this hot or what? Diane orders another wine, and she's laughing on what's going on. Dad can't hear anything on what is going on. He is still trying to locate the chicken, keeps eating rolls and fritters. Both Mom and Dad take their baked potatoes home along with the fritters and rolls. By this time, Dee is half under the table and asks me if I could finish the wine. Naren is just sitting there, taking all this in. Now comes the chocolate cake with 1 candle on it. Mom said, Pete, you blow it out. He said, what? Now the cake is on fire, and I had to blow the thing out. Mom's mouth was still on fire. Now it is time to leave, and we go to the gift shop. Mom kept saying what a great ride it is out there. We looked at the ducks and the geese on the way out. We rode back in the dark and landed at 9 o'clock. Good thing Naren drove and Diane was giggling and weeing all the way home. The folks had a good time. It was a good time had by all. So it seems the evening went rather well. Khan from Awad and I talked about advertising his business, and he asked about the internet and the web and how they might help him. I tried to explain the reality of the internet at this point in time, both as a research device and a marketing tool. June 29th, 96. The first half of the week was pretty hectic. I had to create 5 reports for Khan at Award. They were similar, but each was unique in the particulars. Khan was concerned that I was overcharging him since a lot of what was in the reports was the same. I told him I'd charge him for the time I put in. By Wednesday, I had completed the reports. Now it was our 24th anniversary. We dined at the Spinner's Lounge atop the Holiday Inn on the beach. It was about 14 stories high. We got there and went looking for a good seat from which to see the sunset. We picked a spot and bought a couple of drinks. I had a sense of motion, and when I looked at the floor, I saw that the outer ring of the lounge, which carried all the tables, was indeed rotating, 1 rotation per hour. I mentioned this to Jan. She had just realized that we were moving. I wish I had said nothing to see how long it took her to realize what was happening. Anyway, the sunset was lovely. While there, we used a paddle boat to float around the resort. Later, we walked the 1.5 miles along the beach, back down to the dawn. We went to listen to the guitar player and stayed till about 9:30. Watched another sunset, lovelier than the night before, turned a bright orange, then pink, then red as it set. We bought lemonades, which we nursed for the whole time we were there. Eventually, we ended up on the chain link swing, watching the twilight sky change colors against the backdrop of the pink palace, the dawn. Jan said this was the best anniversary ever. We love being together. Toward the end of July, Jen, Paul Jr., and Alicia stopped at my parents' house. Jen was the initiator. She wanted to see them before she headed out west. In a phone conversation since then, she said that my father spent most of his time talking to Paul. Jen said my mother kept mentioning how much she liked my last letter. My sister Dee wasn't there, which upset me. She always writes that she doesn't like being alone and doesn't have enough to keep her busy, yet she didn't consider the kids' visit to be important enough to be there. Jen said they looked pretty good physically. The kids took them out to Friendly's for dessert. I guess they really enjoyed the downing the sundaes that the kids ordered. We spoke to Paul a few days later, and he said he enjoyed the time he spent with my parents. He said my father was a regular chatterbox, talking about all kinds of things. The Weekly Planet printed a letter of mine right on page 2. The letter was more serious than the last one I sent. I lauded the paper for the excellent piece they did on the problems of children in our society, especially on the way in which they reviewed several philosophical views on the overall notion of how best to raise children. In early August, I had a hectic past few days. Khan had been grating on my nerves. He called me to prepare an application for a small business administration loan he wanted to apply for. As usual, he waited until the last minute, told me that I could charge him $50. After explaining what he wanted, I told him I'd have to get $100. Over the 3 days, I put in many hours into that project. As usual, he added some material and changed other things. I finally completed the application that he needed for the interview with the SBA official. He expected me to make additional changes if required. I got angry at that point. He responded that he didn't want to keep arguing over my charges. I explained that we had a fundamental difference in the way we did business. I said that I had to charge for my time, not by the project as he did. I always tried to give a fair price for a piece of work and didn't care for his way of trying to reduce it by a third or more. Finally, he agreed that he would accept my charges without argument as long as I was fair with him. Paul called and announced that he bought Alicia a diamond. He would be taking her out on a dining cruise on the Odyssey in Boston Harbor, where he'll give her the ring. Here's Paul's description of the proposal. The evening started out with a limo pulling up to the front of Alicia's house, but Alicia didn't really suspect anything. She just thought Paul was making a big deal out of their dating anniversary. She expected the limo to take them to a regular restaurant in Boston, but it took them to the harbor and dropped them off for the dinner cruise on the Odyssey. Before dinner, while Paul and Alicia were on deck looking out over the water, Paul dropped to one knee before Alicia. Alicia, with the dawning realization of what was coming, she broke into tears and said later that she thought she was going to faint. She felt weak in the knees. When she accepted, all the people around her broke into applause. I mentioned to Paul that he not only made a memory for them, but for a lot of people who probably related the experience to friends and families. The meal consisted of pasta for appetizer, followed by a complete turkey dinner. According to Paul, the waiter brought them a bottle of champagne. They didn't even bother to card Alicia, even though she wasn't yet 21.